Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. And if you're a true General Hospital fan, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get started with today's video. Drew Kane, Caitlin McMullen, will leave Willow Kane, Caitlin McMullen, terrified on Tuesday, July 28th, according to General Hospital, GH, teasers, while Jason Morgan, Steve Burton, will have a pair of pleasant reunions. Marshall Ashford, Robert Gossett, will also make a comeback on GH, so let's talk about what to expect. First, Carly Spencer, Laura Wright, will reunite with Jason and hug him, expressing her joy that he has returned home. Jason will hook up with Carly and Sonny Corinthos, Maurice Bernard, who will be delighted to see Jason free again. When Marshall returns to town, Isaiah Gannon, Andy Wilson, will join Portia Robinson, Brooke Kerr, at her home. Marshall will recognize that, despite being fatigued from caring for a newborn, Portia looks wonderful. Marshall will likely have the opportunity to meet his new grandson and congratulate Portia on the birth of Desmond Ashford. Yaira Avila Fond. Jocelyn Jacks, Eden McCoy, will have a talk with Trina Robinson, Tabiana Ali, and Emma Scorpio Drake, Braden Bruner. Emma will have a lot of questions about Jocelyn now that her WSB status has been public. It'll make Emma worry why Jocelyn would choose this kind of life for herself. Thus, Joss will defend her profession choice. Nina Reeves, Cynthia Watros, and Jack Brennan, Chris McKenna, will continue to question Giovanni, Gio, Palmieri, Giovanni Mazza, who will eventually reveal Drew's location. Brennan and Nina are surprised to learn that Drew seemingly insisted on returning home following his horrific lake adventure. Drew has just entered into his darkened house, startling Willow, indicating that a huge confrontation is going to take place. "I am so excited about what comes next," Drew says to a horrified Willow in Tuesday's preview video. Willow will be terrified, but Brennan now has the blackmail material required to assist Willow and Nina quiet Drew. That could come in handy and be excellent news for Willow in future episodes. Meanwhile, Michael Corinthos, Rory Gibson, exhibits behavior that perplexes Jacinda Bracken, Paige Herschel. Rocco Falconeri, Finn Carr, will also feel anxious, so he may not believe the shooting drama is done. According to General Hospital spoilers, Rocco and many other characters are in for more surprises, so stay tuned to the ABC soap. Willow's hands trembled as she knelt on the living room's hardwood floor, her fingers brushing across the dark smear of dirt that shouldn't be there. When she rushed in, the house was silent, the type of heavy hush that comes after a day of close calls and unresolved questions. She came home to pack. She grabbed a few clothes for herself, some necessities for Wiley and Amelia, and whatever else she could before being halted. On paper, the plan was simple: collect the kids, leave Port Charles, and disappear before the walls closed in entirely. Jack had offered new identities. Nina was ready to run. The black box that was supposed to keep Drew silent had vanished, along with their final bit of leverage. She hadn't anticipated footsteps. It wasn't raining. Nobody else had a key. The prints led from the front door to the center of the room and then stopped, as if the person who created them had retreated into the darkness. Willow's breath caught. She leaned in, heart pounding, and the door slammed shut behind her. She turned around. Drew stood at the foyer. He was saturated, his clothes clinging to his body and his hair dropping down the floor in slow, steady drops. Mud stuck to his shoes and the cuffs of his jeans. He stood straight. He was moving with his own power. And he was staring at her with a glare that chilled the blood in her veins. For months, she had complete control over every word he said and every movement of his limbs. The medicines had kept him trapped within himself, a prisoner in his own skin, while she and Nina handled the story. Congress. Custody. The delicate story of a devoted wife who cares for her broken spouse. All of this was predicated on the premise that Drew would never stand on his own 2 feet again and tell the truth. Now he was speaking. His voice was low and raspy from disuse, yet distinct enough to break the silence of the home. He spoke her name once, and the sound made her flinch. There was no pleading involved. No misunderstanding. Only a chilly, controlled rage that had been gathering in the shadows for half a year. Willow's thoughts raced. Nina shoved him into the lake. That much she knew based on the frantic calls earlier. Nina had thought she'd finished it. Gio had found him. Somebody had brought him here. Or he'd walked. Regardless, the man standing in front of her was not the defenseless patient she had abandoned. She hurried away, placing the couch between them, words coming out in a hurry. She tried explanations, half-truths, and the same reasons she had given herself for months. The youngsters needed her. Michael would never hand them back. Drew had become a risk. She had merely completed what was necessary. Drew listened without interrupting. The water from his garments continued to fall into the floor, creating a murky puddle around his feet. When she stopped speaking, he took one step forward. Then another. The space between them narrowed until she could see the set of his jaw and the complete lack of mercy in his gaze. "You kept me like that," he explained. "You and your mom." Willow's future, the carefully crafted life she had fought for, the political career, the image of the dedicated mother, everything hung on a thread in that moment. Drew's phone call would cause the entire house of cards to collapse. Custody would be ended. Freedom would be lost. The only question remaining was how far he would go to make her pay. Across town, another reunion was taking place under very different conditions. Jason Morgan entered the familiar place where Carly and Sonny were waiting, and for a brief instant, the years appeared to fold in on themselves. He'd previously seen Britt. That initial meeting had been harsh, with a slap, tears, and a whispered exchange of "I love you" that neither of them had expected to repeat again. Britt had told him about the Huntington's deceit, the guilt she still felt, and how she had nearly wrecked herself in order to survive for a future that had almost vanished. He'd told her about Jakarta, the unexpected release, and his choice to take Danny on the road before confronting the rest of Port Charles. Now it was Carly's and Sonny's turn. Carly's arms wrapped around him before he could speak. She held on tight, like she always did, as if she could stop him from disappearing again with pure willpower. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were damp, but her voice was crisp. She was upset that he had been free and hadn't notified her. She'd spent weeks believing the worst. The least he could have done was pick up the phone. Jason didn't argue. He just told her the truth, as he understood it. The WSB had released him without explanation, charges had been dropped, and he had an airline ticket home. He needed to spend time with his son before the rest of the world flooded in. Danny needed it too. Sonny stood a few feet away, watching the encounter with the calm of someone who has lost too many people to take anything for granted. When Jason finally turned to face him, the handshake developed into a brief, forceful embrace. No lengthy speeches. Just a modest acknowledgement that the two of them were still standing, bonded by the same tangled loyalty that had characterized so much of their past. They sat down. Carly and Sonny started the arduous process of catching him up. Everything had happened since late March. Shifting alliances. New faces. The old foes who had never really left. Valentine's involvement in Carly's life. Sonny was trying to strike a delicate balance with the organization. Michael's steadfast commitment to protect the children from Willow at all costs. While Jason was imprisoned, Port Charles continued to move quietly. Jason listened more than he talked. The man who returned from Jakarta was not the same person who had left. Prison had taken away something and replaced it with something tougher. He inquired about Danny, Scout, and the living circumstances at the Quartermain residence. He inquired about Britt again, and Carly's countenance softened as she responded. She was relieved he had someone. She was relieved he was home. Sonny observed him across the table. There was careful and oblique discussion on what Jason's return meant for the firm. Ethan had begun taking up specific roles. People had adjusted. Jason made it plain that his priorities had changed. Fatherhood came first. The others might wait or fall away totally. He wasn't sure which option he'd take yet, but he knew the old impulse to step back into the line of fire wasn't automatic anymore. Carly leaned across to take his hand. Whatever came next, she added, they would confront it the same way they always had. Together, even if the concept of together shifted. The fight was far from finished when Willow returned to the house she formerly lived with Drew. Drew did not raise his voice. He did not have to. Each silent statement felt like a verdict. He recounted the months of confinement, the enforced stillness, and how she smiled for cameras while he remained locked. He discussed the children, the lies presented in court, and the deliberate strategy to portray him as the damaged one while she positioned herself as the only stable parent left. Willow attempted to bargain. She offered to leave. She volunteered to tell the truth under her own terms. She offered anything that would buy her a few extra hours, allowing her to reach the children before the authorities arrived. Drew observed her with the patience of a guy who had spent the previous half-year doing nothing but planning this moment. Outside, time was short. Nina and Jack were already on the move, desperate to contain the damage. Gio knew more than he'd admitted. The black box remained somewhere in Port Charles, along with the proof that could alter Willow's entire narrative. Drew took another stride. Willow's back met the wall. "Your future," he added almost softly, "is at stake. And I get to determine how it ends." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with everything stolen and soon to be recovered. Jason sat across town with the two individuals who had always known him best, starting the arduous process of rediscovering his identity. 2 returns. 2 reckonings. On a typical Tuesday in Port Charles, the ground had moved beneath everyone's feet, and nothing would be the same by the time the sun set. Willow's breath was shallow and quick. Drew's quiet after that final phrase was worse than the threat. He merely remained there, dripping on the floor she had once meticulously cleaned, waiting to see what she would do next.
Run. Fight. Beg. Confess.
Each decision resulted in its own destruction. She thought about Wiley and Amelia, the life she had promised them, and the Congresswoman's office, where people still believed the story she told. All of it seemed remote now, like a dream that was already fading. Drew's gaze never left her. In the distance, a car door closed. Footsteps approached the home. Nina's voice rang out, frantic and terrified. Jack's following. The cavalry had arrived too late to stop what had already started. Jason, miles away, leaned forward in his chair to ask Sonny one more question about the organization, loyalty, and the cost of walking away. Carly listened, her hand still resting on Jason's, and for the first time in a long time, the three of them felt like themselves after surviving everything else. Willow's hands trembled as she knelt on the living room's hardwood floor, her fingertips brushing over the dark, moist streaks of mud that shouldn't have been there. The house was silent, too quiet for a place that had once echoed with children's laughter and the regular rhythm of a life she had battled so hard to restore. Outside, the late afternoon light from Port Charles crept through the half-drawn drapes in thin, dusty shafts, but inside everything felt heavier and colder. She had only returned to fetch a few necessities. Wiley's favorite stuffed animal, Amelia's small blue blanket, a change of clothes, and the fake paperwork that Jack had assured would get them out of the country before anybody noticed. She had planned to leave within the hour. Instead, she was staring at footsteps that had not there when she left that morning. The front door slammed shut after her, rattling the glass in the nearby window. Willow turned around so quickly that her knees scraped the floor. Drew Kane stood in the foyer, dripping lake water over the mat. He was no longer the silent, blank figure she and Nina had kept under tight control for months. He stood straight. He was walking. His eyes, which she had previously mistook for affection, were piercing, fierce, and completely aware. The mud stuck to the bottoms of his shoes and the cuffs of his soaking jeans. His hair was stuck to his forehead. A tiny incision near his temple still seeped some blood. But he was alive, and he was looking at her as if he had been waiting for this very moment. "Hello, Willow." The sound of his voice after weeks of silence struck her like a physical blow. She scrambled backward, pressing her shoulders into the edge of the couch. Her mind raced through every imaginable explanation, but none provided safety. Nina shoved him into the sea. Jack had been searching for the black box that was intended to keep Drew contained. And still, he stood there, speaking in that quiet, measured tone that had previously made her feel safe, but now made her skin crawl. You're supposed to be dead," Drew finished for her. He took one hesitant step forward, then another, leaving fresh, wet prints on the floor. "That is what Nina hoped. That is exactly what you both hoped. But the lake wasn't deep enough, and I wasn't as broken as you assumed." Willow's throat clenched. She could still hear Nina's anxious voice on the phone earlier, as well as her mother's voice when she realized the wheelchair had gone under and not come back up. Jack had raced to the boathouse. Gio had discovered something. None of it mattered anymore. Drew was in her house, while the children remained at Lila's place, waiting for a mother who might never return. "I never wanted it to go this far," she muttered, her words tasting like ash. "You have to understand. I understand everything." Drew's voice remained calm, almost compassionate, which only made matters worse. "I understand you held me trapped inside my own body for half a year. I realized that every time I tried to talk or move, you and Nina made sure the medications kept me silent. I understand you were preparing suitcases so you could run away with my children, my niece and nephew, while leaving me to perish." He came to a halt a few feet away, close enough for her to smell the lake on him, the wet earth, and the harsh metallic tang of blood. Willow's gaze shifted to the hallway that went to the back entrance. Drew followed her eyes and smiled, but not warmly. "Don't. You'll never make it." Her future, which she had been furiously attempting to rewrite, dangled on a thread so thin that it could break at the slightest wrong phrase. She'd already lost Michael. She'd already lost primary custody of the children. She had already lost the version of herself who felt that love could solve any problem. The man she had helped cage was now free, and he appeared to be ready to collect all of her debts. Across town, in Carly's cozy living room, a different type of reunion was taking place. Jason stood just inside the doorway, the late-day light accentuating the new creases around his eyes and the slight rigidity in his posture. The months in that Jakarta prison had transformed him, but not in ways that his loved ones had anticipated. He remained steady and calm, the man who measured every word before speaking it. Carly had thrown her arms around him the moment she spotted him, clinging on longer than any of them would normally allow. Sonny had grasped his shoulder so firmly that it had bruised, leaving his face raw and unprotected. "You should have called," Carly added once the initial wave of emotion subsided. She wiped her eyes without apologizing. "You should have called me the second they let you out," Jason said, his mouth twitching in what appeared to be a smile. "I needed to see Britt first. Then I had to make sure Danny was okay. I wasn't trying to hurt you." "You didn't hurt me," Carly responded, though the crack in her voice suggested otherwise. "You terrified me. There's a difference." Sonny sat against the back of the couch, arms folded, contemplating the man who had once been his right hand but had evolved into something more like a brother. "Sit down. Both of you. We have a lot to catch up on, and I'm not going to do it by standing in the doorway like strangers." They sat. Carly poured coffee that none of them particularly wanted. Jason remembered the smell of Jocelyn's perfume and lemon polish from years ago. Outside, the port swirled with its normal frantic intensity, but inside the room felt suspended, as if the world had stopped long enough for three individuals who had been through too much to simply look at each other again. Jason spoke first, his voice low and calm. He told them about the unexpected discharge, the strange paperwork that emerged one morning, and the long flight home, which still felt surreal. He told them about finding Britt in the hospital, the slap that was equal parts rage and relief, and the silent exchange of "I love you" that calmed something in his chest. He made no mention of the prison's darker corners, the isolation, the unanswered questions, or the way time had stretched so that days and nights blurred together. Some things he'd save until later, or never. Carly filled in the blanks from Port Charles, Valentine's reappearance, and the convoluted manner in which he had placed himself into her life. The black case still made her nervous whenever she thought about it. Jocelyn's behavior has become increasingly clandestine. Michael's iron grasp on the children, as well as Willow's decisions, exacerbated the situation. Sonny filled in the gaps left by Carly, such as the quiet movements in power, the people who attempted to fill the void left by Jason, and the way Ethan slipped into roles that never fully fit him. "You're different," Sonny replied after a lengthy pause. This was not an accusation. Jason caught his gaze. "I spent months believing I'd never see any of this again. That alters a guy." Carly reached across the small space between them and grabbed his hand. Her fingertips were warm. "You're home. That is what matters. The rest will sort out as we go.